You have questions, we have answers. This is Jane Muller.
And this is Ken Muller. Welcome to our show, all about real estate with Ken and Jane. Today, Jane, we're going to continue the home buying process from the buyer perspective. So let's do a quick recap. The last 2 weeks, we covered the home shopping process, kind of like the wish list, the things the buyer has to get in order before they start the home shopping process. First of all, like before you go to the supermarket, you got to check your wallet, make sure you have a credit card. Or
and
you have
cash
money,
sometimes.
right? Or you have cash. So likewise, we covered that in the very first show on the buyer process. You got to have the money, which namely would be either the funds if you're going to pay cash, or the what they call the buyer pre-approval letter, as known in the real estate market, which is a letter from the lender saying, based on their screening and I guess normally their credit run, that the buyer is approved to borrow X amount of dollars, towards the purchase of a home. That was what we concluded was the most important thing before you engage an agent. And then we spoke about how you want to select a real estate agent who's qualified and somebody who you click with, who's knowledgeable, who's responsive, and how important the agent is, because that's a professional that's going to help you in the whole process. And then we covered the things about your home search, picking the right the house that you want, the neighborhood you want, the considerations for where you want to live based on your if you have school-aged kids, the rating of the school system, your proximity to the work, relatives, in-laws. Maybe you want to be close, or maybe you want to be far away.
I would say close, but not too close.
And then we covered that once you narrow down the home search, about the next steps of the process would be basically writing up an offer, what makes your offer, how you can make your offer a little bit more competitive in this what's been a highly competitive market the last 2 years, and then how you make your offer stick out. So let's pick up with the point where the offer has been accepted by the seller, and talk about what happens. We're going to cover what happens once assuming you have realtors involved. There's the buyer agent prepares uses the realtor pre-printed contract of sale. They fill in the blanks, they fill in the price, the deposit, the closing date, the mortgage amount, any special. A lot of it is a lot of the realtor contract addresses the home inspection. They address the radon inspection. They address environmental issues. They give all the rights, and everything is in there. And a lot of what the realtor does is fill in the dates and the blanks and the blanks, right? But as we know, in New Jersey, the realtor contract is a starting point for the attorneys, because it's a non-binding contract, and it can be canceled. It can be reviewed and disapproved of or canceled within 3 business days by either the buyer attorney or the seller attorney. And that's
one thing I just want to bring to attention is because the buyer may come from out of state. For example, last few years, we have a lot of New York buyers come to New Jersey. And the one thing I heard from the buyer agent is they make offer, but they don't want to sign the contract. Because in New Jersey, as we covered in previous sessions, right, the New Jersey, this a pre-printed document. Why I say document? Because when the buyer make an offer, you use that the pre-printed document. As you mentioned, Ken, the buyer agent write a name, property address, how much, when's the closing date, when's how much the down payment, all these details, right? And when the buyer sign it, it's called offer. So, but actually the document says the contract. So a lot of buyer out of state afraid to sign. They said, I don't want to sign a contract. I want my lawyer review. I want to make sure what I'm signing is, I need my lawyer. But in New Jersey, it's different. So sometimes you could waste a lot of time back and forth. In the meantime, other offer came in, the seller took other offer, right? Because sometimes they do a letter of intent. And by the time you get everything ready, the seller already pick another one. So that's one thing I want to make buyers to be aware. So the document's called contract, but when the buyer sign it, it's called offer. And then when the seller sign it. It's called a contract. But even then, you will, as a buyer's point of view, you will say, "Well, this contract then. So what protection I have if I change my mind, or if the term is not favorable to me, I need a legal advice." But once the seller signed it, called a contract, but it's not a binding contract.
Right. And that's why with the contract of sale, there's a requirement that any realtor contract of sale be accompanied by the opinion 26. And normally we use the statewide approved NJAR, New Jersey Association of Realtor contract. And that document is the first page of the contract of sale. And it states very clearly that this contract, you have 3 business days to get an attorney who can review it and make changes, and only the attorney can give you legal advice, and only the attorney can disapprove of it. So that's why that has to be, that disclosure is so important, because that was a settlement between the Realtor Association and the Bar Association, which allowed the Supreme Court basically gave realtors the right to use a pre-printed contract and fill in the blanks, so long as the attorneys had the right to review and make changes to it. That was a settlement, because the attorneys back in the 70s, they challenged the realtor, said, "Hey, these guys can't be writing in contracts because they're practicing law."
Yes.
So that's what it was, an unauthorized practice of law. So the Supreme Court got involved, and they're the ones that govern the unauthorized practice of law, and they came to a settlement.
That's exactly what happened here for most buyers from New York, because in New York, you have to make, in my understanding, once again, I'm not New York licensed, what I heard was you have to make a letter of intent, negotiate it, do home inspection, and then once everything's almost done, you go to attorney to write a contract. But in New Jersey, just opposite. You're looking for a house, you make an offer. When the seller sign it, become a contract, and then lawyers take over from there. That's why in the previous 2 sessions, we highly recommend that you have a lawyer, because in that case, in the early stage, you have a time, you can ask the lawyer any questions. They can explain to you the process. Yet another thing is, Ken, you just mentioned 3 days. It's 3 days you must hire attorney to represent you. Say I had recently had an issue, right? The buyer bought it, and later on the buyer changed mind. Okay, so the seller contract already signed. So we're waiting for the buyer's attorney, because we signed and give to the buyer agent, but the buyer agent could not get contact with the buyer. Some buyers feel if I don't answer your call, or in that case, the buyer blocked the buyer agent, which is, because he feel if I hide my head in the sand, you can't find me. Yeah, I offered, but I changed my mind, but I don't want to talk to you, because he think, agent may.
In other words, the agent figured, the buyer figured, I signed it, but I'm just going to ignore it, and it'll just go away.
Yeah, just go away.
Alone, and don't bother me anymore.
Exactly. And the buyer agent actually was very good. She was very responsible, and she reached out to me. She said, "Jane, and we have an issue here. I represent this buyer, but I've been calling, texting, emailing, and they block my phone call, so I can no longer call. So I know they got." I said, "How do you know they now travel? How do you know they got your message?" She said, "Yeah, they blocked me, so I know." And at that point, I did something which normally I would not do. I said, "Do you mind share your client phone number?" They said, "Why?" I said, "Well, at least I can reach out." And sure enough, they shared. They said, "Jane, please help us, because how are we going to do? Only lawyer can cancel, but we don't have a lawyer, right?" So at the end, but we have to confirm truly the buyer want to cancel. We can't just assume they don't want it. So that's the point. So I used my phone to call the buyer, but the buyer didn't know the number, so they answered it. So we had, at the beginning, he thought I was pushing him. Now I explained him, I'm here to protect you as much as my seller. I represent the seller. So I want to make sure you understood in New Jersey. I mean, if you don't believe me, you better have an attorney. Otherwise, if you do nothing, today is already the 3rd day, because your agent tried to find you 2 days, couldn't get in touch with you. And otherwise, you are purchase this house, the contract's binding under this pre-printed contract, which is not, it seems to me, may not be what you wanted. So long story short, the buyer understood, and they hired an attorney. So, and in the meantime, I report to the seller and seller attorney. So at the end, the seller attorney, will agree to let the buyer go. But just want to buyer to understand, once that contract signed, right, you have to have if you change your mind, which is fine, during the attorney review, either the seller or buyer can change mind, cancel contract with or without any reason. You don't need a reason. You wake up, you say, you know what, maybe, just buyer's remorse and say, I don't want to go ahead. That's quite okay. But just make sure your attorney send out the letter to terminate the contract during the attorney review. So your deposit.
So that's a very key point during attorney review. That I guess we kind of covered the next topic, which is attorney review, because a lot of buyers and a lot of sellers still don't understand. They think once the contract is signed that it's binding, but basically that's just really the start. You're not we're talking about it from the buyer's perspective. The buyer is really not protected. So it's critical to the buyer that their attorney issue their proposed changes as soon as possible, because your goal as the buyer is you want to get in and out of attorney review as quickly as possible, because the more time it lingers, the better the chances are that the seller can get a higher offer, a more favorable offer, and they could kill you they could cancel your contract any time for any reason whatsoever
or no reason at all.
Yeah, or no reason at all. So from the seller's perspective, if in this highly competitive market, you're no great rush to get out of attorney review, unless of course you have a phenomenal offer and you just want to lock it in. But from the buyer's perspective, you have all time is of the essence to get attorney review done.
Absolutely. A lot of time, right? I mean, as I said, yes, you mentioned, Ken, you're not bending, so either party can cancel. But on the other hand, as I mentioned earlier, if nobody did anything after 3 days, you are bending. So that's the tricky part. If both lawyer did nothing, if both buyer and seller did nothing, in that case, because the seller attorney didn't do anything, so it's crucial for the buyer come back, to cancel it. But if both sides did nothing after 3 days, you're bending under this contract. But if you want to buy the house, your lawyer send a letter, so you have to really quick, as Ken mentioned, to finish review as soon as possible. That's really in the in the benefit, in the favor of the buyer to protect their interest.
Yeah,
yes.
And that's why it's all the more important to have experienced attorneys, because most of the time an experienced real estate attorney will have their standard proposed changes based on, because they review thousands of realtor contracts. They know already what the terms are. Then they'll tweak it to put in specific terms to further cater towards the buyer's needs when they speak to them.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Why don't we take a short break and we'll be right back after these messages. Okay, welcome back. So Jane, let's just wrap up the attorney review. And another thing I want to clear up is that attorney review, a lot of people have the misconception that attorney review takes 3 days and it's done. No, that's just when attorney review must be initiated within 3 days. But again, it could take a day, it could take a couple hours if the attorneys are really responsive and they're working on the case, or it could take a week to 2 weeks or longer if the attorneys are not experienced in real estate and you hire your uncle's attorney who doesn't specialize in it. We've had that situation, and the attorney literally, you can tell the story about one case you had from years ago where there was an attorney that I think took 2 weeks to respond, and then he wrote like a 30-page letter.
30-page.
And the attorney, you could clearly tell he didn't practice real estate because, and it was somebody, I think it was a relative of the seller or the buyer. Yeah. So it proved to be disastrous because it just hindered the whole transaction. So
absolutely. But generally speaking, for the buyer's purpose, attorney review, we experienced, right? Normally, it's about 3 to 5 business days. That's a standard. But there's no requirement. Don't get me wrong. Don't say, oh, Jane said it must be done. No. Generally speaking, the contract signs and both attorney. Most cases, the buyer attorney initiate the first letter. But it's not the rule. It's just custom. It's not the rule. So the buyer attorney review the contract, send out the first letter, and then that's the first, 1 day, and then the seller attorney review with the seller and respond maybe the second day, and then they come back maybe another round to get agreement. So most cases, 3 to 5 business days, that's reasonable. And I did see the quickest one is 2 hours, because in the morning the seller buyer attorney sent a letter, seller attorney came back with the response within 2 hours, and then next thing I saw the buyer attorney sign it off. Just that was it.
Right. I was going to say I've seen situations.
2 hours.
I've seen situations where typically the buyer attorney has made proposed changes, the seller attorney had no further changes and agreed with them, and they would sign off on it, which is unusual. Usually both attorneys have proposed changes, even though that
a few rounds,
and usually like you said, usually the buyer attorney has more extensive changes because they're they're trying to further protect their buyers.
Yeah.
They may want to extend the home inspection. They may want to extend the mortgage commitment deadline. They may want to say that there's no automatic waivers of any contingencies, to further protect the buyer. There's a lot of standard things that they do to further protect the buyer's interests.
Yeah, but as I said, quickest one, 2 hours. The buyer attorney send we send out the contract 9 o'clock. By 11 and by 10:30, the letter came in. By 12, and the seller attorney responded. Next thing I saw in two minutes, the email came in to say we conclude review, and the clock start from now.
All right, so let's talk about it. Now we covered attorney review. So once attorney review is over, the attorneys have and typically what happens is either the attorneys will sign off on the addendums on behalf of the clients, or they'll have the actual buyer and seller sign the agreed upon addendums. I mean, unless they have express written authority. But anyway, at that point, you have a binding contract, and the binding contract is the realtor contract of sale and incorporates all the agreed upon changes between the attorneys. So that's what your contract is. And now it goes onward and upward, right?
That's right. And one thing is I want to bring to the buyer's attention, the clock, in fact, start from now, after you conclude the review. Because in the contract, you often say the deposit due in 5 days or whatever the days after attorney review. That's the point. Whatever the both lawyers sign off or both seller and buyer sign off depends on the attorney preference. Once the both attorney confirmed, we officially conclude the review. We conclude review officially under contract. At that moment, the date count. Most cases, the commitment due 30 days is from that date.
Okay, so let's talk now. Let's talk now from the buyer's perspective.
Yes.
Okay, so you're the buyer's contract. You're under contract. The buyer has homework to do. And what would you say the next step is? They have to obviously apply for they should be
apply for the mortgage.
Now that they know they've got a firm contract, they can still get out of it. Of course, if they don't, usually they can get out of it if the home inspection they don't come to an agreement, or if they don't get the mortgage. But they have to make a good faith effort to apply for the mortgage, which means cooperate with their loan officer, submit all the requested pay stubs and bank statements and whatever else the loan officer needs to timely process the application.
Yeah. One information I would like to share, regardless right or wrong, but some people do that. I would say Ken is 100% right. You should apply mortgage as soon as you're under contract. That's the time you will email the contract to your loan officer, officially apply. But because recently we had since March, especially May and June, we had a lot of sharp interest rate increases. So I did see some buyers is really proactive. So the moment the seller signed the contract, they go in the attorney review. By the way, that time is not binding contract. Some buyer already show that off to the loan officer. So they already initiate the loan application, so they can lock in the rate. So I have a story to share. What happened was we had a contract signed, I think Thursday, and a Friday the lawyer start review, and that was in May or June. So anyway, the Fed come to Wednesday, said the rate jump up 75 basis point, and the buyer actually, they had a contract, they applied the loan that day, and obviously that night they had a conference meeting with their loan officer and the buyer agent, and they realized they buying a house, obviously $800,000 house, the mortgage went up, monthly payment almost $800 a month. So by Thursday morning, 6:30, when I woke up, I got a text that Jane, let's talk. That's from the buyer agent, say we under contract. But now, my buyer have to come up $800. So we're not sure whether they're going to be, if they're going to be
if they even got to qualify.
They're very tight. Once again, they could push, but very tight, but make a buyer very nervous, right?
$800 a month is a lot of money.
A lot of money.
Cover that.
A lot of money. Just like when the buyer made an offer, was a week before accepted, but actually when they apply, if they applied that Thursday last week, they would lock in that rate. But they did the right thing. First of all, I would say they did the right thing. They waited under contract and then they apply. But just happened that day, the rate went on the roof. So at the end, by the morning, the lawyer got involved. At the end, I talked to the seller. The seller decided to let them off. Just say, you know what, we understand you don't feel comfortable. Possibly you're not even qualified now. We don't know, So at the end, too tight a number. So the buyer's nervous, and plus the loan is tight. So the seller and buyer mutually agreed, cancel the contract.
Right, and we covered this in prior shows about the effect of when we had this show on, when we dedicated the show to the interest rates. That's one of the side effects of the increased interest rates, that you're still going to have a buyer pool, but the buyer pool will shift from, they may drop $100,000 a bracket, and this is a good example that you just gave. The buyer was interested in an $800,000 house, but whammy, after the rate hike, I mean, $800, they no longer can afford $800,000. Maybe now their bracket is under $700,000.
Yeah, that's why the reason today I especially brought up this topic and shared the story with the buyers is now the rate's most likely going to go up again. So, I mean, you better, whatever you get the pre-approval, if the rates go up, you better double check with your lender whether you're still qualified or maybe it's too tight, make you nervous. So that's really should be take very serious consideration, because buying a house is a happy occasion. So you and family, the kids, everybody's so happy. And if because the rate movement and suddenly you have to give up what you already had, that's heartbreaking. That's heartbreaking. So I just want to bring to your attention. And, some buyers got a great rate because they locked in during the attorney review. But, if you talk to your loan officer, see whether that's, what's that going to be entailed. Yeah. So, but once again, your contract can be canceled during the attorney review. But I don't know whether your lender charge you a fee when you apply. So that's something you have to talk to your lender directly.
Right.
We're really not qualified to discuss anything out of our expertise.
And while speaking about the lenders, what happens sometimes to the surprise of the seller, again, we're talking about it from the buyer perspective, is that when the seller in a few weeks after you're under contract goes to contact the loan officer says, what file? I don't have any file from Joe Smith for this property. And then you find out that the buyer during the whole secretly switched lenders because, they shopped around and they found a lender that gave a more favorable rate and maybe favorable terms. And so that's something that I guess the buyer has a right to do, but the buyer agent, they really should inform the attorney. Inform the attorney and the parties.
Yeah,
right.
Because once again, as a buyer, you have right to get a loan from any lender. Right, that's your rights. But on the other hand, you should be, respect the contract. You should inform the seller and give us updated pre-approval from new lender. That's all. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, we didn't cover as much as I wanted to in this show, so we're going to continue. We're going to cover continue the buyer process next week where we left off. We'll do a quick recap. All right. Until then, hope everyone has a great rest of the weekend.
Thank you.